I think resistance is one of the most interesting phenomena because it's amazing to me, just speaking personally, how often I can officially want something. Like I'm signed on the dotted line. I want this thing. And then I do everything in my power not to do it, you know?
Give me an example.
Writing and yoga are two that jump to mind, right? These are two things that I officially love. I'm a writing teacher. I was a yoga teacher for a while. I I always love doing the thing that I teach. I love writing and I love doing yoga. But sometimes, often in fact, the prospect of sitting down and finding my way into the practice is just appalling to me on some level. And I can't explain why, but you know, I can't do it. It's like a block that's so intense. I almost can't imagine how I would get through it. And then the conditions can change, and then suddenly I love it and I slip into it effortlessly. That to me is a mystery.
And when you say the conditions change, is this in this particular setting where you feel resistance, or this is a different day, different time?
It could be 20 minutes later. Something could just I don't even know if time plays a major role in this. It's just something like as long as you're in a different state, you could find doing that activity that you had a resistance to be monumental or nothing at all. I had a little taste of this too when I was in a Buddhist meditation community in Dublin many, many years ago, way back when I was doing my PhD. And they used to talk about resistance a lot because they were interested in it too. And like, there's nothing easier in a way than meditation because you don't even do anything. You just sit and you watch what's happening emerge of itself. And yet somehow they always found that they had a resistance to meditating from time to time. They would just really not want to sit on that cushion. What's going on?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm surprised actually to hear that those Buddhist monks also had resistance to sitting down.
Mm,
Out of all of my practices, this is my third time bringing it up for 3 podcasts. Standing still, I
mm,
cannot say I experience resistance to it for
that's great.
whatever reason it might be. Yeah, and but like when I did, let's say I did consciously train myself in to the practice using what I would suggest to clients in overcoming their resistance to change and low hanging fruit requests in the shape of an incremental load on their nervous system, so to speak. So I would have first set a timer for myself and said, I'm just going to stand still for 5 minutes. I put my phone out of my reach so I wouldn't be looking to see how long have I been here? And I would just stand still. And when the notification alerted, that was my cue to stop or continue if I wanted to. And I just slowly increased the time until I got to a point in where I didn't require the timing of it. I started to use things like when the cows in my site move from over to this location, or if they move to this location at all, then I'll consider not standing still. And I would use clouds and things like that because it got to the point, it is still at the point where I don't mind, providing I've allocated time in my away from my obligations and I have this window to stand still, then I can play with the things that cue me to stop if it's something other than outside of me, other than the
That's great.
sensation
I
of what
love
I've done.
I love the idea of switching the cloud time. Like that is an appropriate measurement for a meditation practice, right?
Right.
That's just we're gonna let these parts of the world float over here and then we'll stop. Um, that's cool. I definitely think that lowering the bar is very important for a lot of people to begin a practice, right? So if you're like you want to start running, but you've never run before or you haven't run since you were a kid, just getting people to get in the practice of putting on their shoes and lacing them up might be enough to break that phobia of starting to run. Like, just put on your shoes, go for a walk around the block. Don't even run. Just do one little walk around the block. Do that for a week. Then next week, maybe do 2 walks around the block. And then eventually you can start slowly jogging once around the block and slowly, incrementally increasing the amount of time or effort that you put into the run, that works. But what I find is intriguing to me is I can do that with my own, let's say, physical practice.
Hmm.
And it builds up and up and up and up. And then one day I suddenly get this feeling like I've got this supervisor that's telling me to take on this huge amount of work that I've built up to. And I just don't want to listen to the supervisor. I feel like it's almost like that level of maturity. Like, I don't want to take orders from this top down agency. So I'm just going to not do, I'd rather be restless and unhappy than listen to my supervisor tell me to go in there and do that work, you know?
That's interesting. There's two things come to my mind. And one is, first of all, uh, let's say the level of significance could possibly be proportionate to the amount of resistance, the self-sabotage style resistance, perhaps. And then the other thing that came to mind is, I suppose, the rebellion. Like an inner rebel, in that a part of you is telling you you must, and another part of you is rebelling against the must.
Yeah.
I don't know which is the case here. This is just what comes to my mind. But in regards to the self-sabotage esque thing, the significance one, this is the word I find really interesting. Not necessarily self-sabotage, but the resistance to becoming, let's say, a better version of yourself, or the version of yourself that you consider to be great or brilliant or idealesque. Why there's resistance to becoming this greater vision of yourself. That to me I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. I know that Jung has written about this resistance to transformation, right? This fear that I don't know if it's an outright fear that some part of you is going to die if you really transform. But I think part of it is that, right? That this fear that if I become a better version of myself, it means I have to stop being this lesser, easier version of myself. And that is a pain, I guess. Most people would want the upgrade, but they're they're in two minds about it, right?
Mm-hmm. The and again, more comes to mind too. I think one in regards to the lesser version of myself. If you were to agree to become the greater version of yourself and take it on, you must stare into the face of being lesser than ideal, and that in itself could be really stress inducing.
Yeah.
Coming to terms with being less of yourself. Of course, it's necessary, and it's something as we all, I suppose, ought to sit in and just be with. Well, maybe I should just speak for myself, but I suppose there is an importance to, I suppose, being humbled,
Mhm.
but also there's going to be a lot of conflict if that can has been kicked down the road for quite a while.
Yeah. It's weird. There's a kind of like if you want to become excellent at anything, you better prepare for an awful lot of being humbled, like a routine of being slammed to the mat or
Yeah,
realize your your draft doesn't look as good as you thought it was going to look or whatever it is you're working on. But I think that there's this weird anti-humility behind resistance, this sense of I don't want to change on some level. I really want to just dig into this version of myself and not and hold on to it and not have it alter. And because it's there's a writer, George MacDonald, that says there's only one principle in hell, and it's this: I am unto myself. I am 100% me, and that's real. That's the realest thing. Whereas I think that there's some forward movement to a real spiritual life that says, I really don't know what I am. I don't know what is making me, and I don't know what this thing that is making me wants from me, but I know it wants me to keep growing and evolving. And that sounds hard. So I think it'd be easier to just sit down on the ground.
yeah, but would it? That's my question then.
It definitely won't because you know what sitting on the ground feels like. It's
Yeah, right.
boring, right?
Yeah, and then I suppose then another part of, let's say, taking on the resistance to change and beginning to change, if you've become accustomed, or let's say the egoic mind is accustomed to a way of living, and you must give that up to shoulder who you become. If you've lived your life in such a way that you've identified unconsciously as a victim and everything would be better if only,
Yeah.
then you lose that, they say, that get out of jail card. You can't use that anymore. And there may have been some leverage with that up to a particular point, and then how to get your hands on some more leverage or power in a way would in itself be quite challenging if you were to drop that card or to drop that, yeah, like I said, that get out of jail free card. How do I leverage the world now, and where do I find power from now? You couldn't, the conflict could be such that you may risk being completely isolated and more powerless.
Yeah, that's a huge point. I don't think we've ever had a period in history. I'm not aware of a period in history when more people have been more incentivized to become full-time victims. And I really don't say that in a callous right-wing way of like dismissing people who are just appealing for more equality or asking that, neurodivergent needs be considered or anything like that. I just mean there is an incredible incentive scheme to settle down into a full-time victimhood status and just try and use the leverage for that for all it's worth, and to let that go, to willingly walk away from that is is extra hard. I think that's what makes it so pernicious. This effort to kind of help people, this ostensibly trying to help people by giving them what you're calling a get out of jail free card, and that get out of jail free card becomes its own jail.
Yeah, precisely. You're not going to give that one up in a
It's a hard one
lose
to
it.
put away or to tear up. Like it's a tough one to tear up.
So then that then is the riddle we're trying to deal
For
with
some
here.
for some people, I think it is. For me, I don't think that I'm not in it. I'm not in a place where I feel I get at a jail card or any kind of victimhood card because I'm one of those people that really hasn't suffered in any meaningful way at all. Right? My life is I live in a first world country. I am healthy. I don't have any legal problems. Like I'm fine. But I do think that there's, for me, a huge amount of should. There's a lot of, in my head, there's a lot of, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. And you should be good at this by now and you should be better at that. And these things should have worked out and you got to get on it. And there comes a point where I just go, how about if I don't?
That's so. That sounds like a rebellion, all right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose then the origin of the shoulds, in like the origin of the shoulds is the social experience to know, right? I was going to say it could be the parents, or it could be the marketing campaigns you've been exposed to, or it could be the books you've read. But it's just everything you've experienced socially up to now that has had a should in it you've taken on, and some of them set in some root, some clause, and you believe them to be true. When I say you know, I mean
Yeah.
you, the listener, all we all, like anyone who has an awareness of the shoulds that have taken up their position as stowaways in the mind.
Yeah. That's right. That there's something like every icon can be used in two different ways. It can be a model of excellence because we're surrounded by models of excellence in every possible field all the time now. Models of beauty, models of athleticism, models of intellectuality, creativity, you name it, right? So we are bombarded with excellence all the time, and like the masterpieces are piling up. And so you, you can either be inspired by that, and many people are, or you can also be completely jaded by it. Like you can just be
Mm.
so overwhelmed by how great these people are and how far away from that level you are that you can just feel like it's almost absurd to try at all. And some days you can have good days and you can like be making progress and you can be really happy with your progress. And then the next day, without any warning, you can just go, oh, this sucks and I suck. I just want to stop this, you know?
And not only are we bombarded with excellence, but each one of those excellent icons has specialized in a particular field to reach that level of excellence. And being bombarded by a multitude of them also means that if you are to pursue any one of those fields of excellence, you are neglecting all these other ones, which in itself can generate a conflict. Because if it's like, I'm going to be the best musician I can be, that is at a forfeit of being as beautiful as I could be possibly, like aesthetically or physically or athletically, or I'll never write that novel if I take this one on. Then you're stuck in a type of procrastination purgatory.
Yeah, right. You're kind of you're picking one partner out of your vast harem and you're kind of murdering all the others or something like that. I was playing guitar right before I called you for this talk, and I always enjoy playing guitar. It usually relaxes me, but today for some reason it just felt very uninspired, and I realized how much extra effort I would have to put in to learning, to upping my level of skill to the point where I would now have a new burst of life with the guitar, and just contemplating it made me want to put the damn thing down in its rack, you know? And
Ray Bradbury has a great book that speaks to exactly that. And I got such a sense of relief from reading the book, on your recommendation, in fact, Zen in the Art of Writing. And you putting the guitar down in Ray Bradbury's book is exactly what you should have done, except he probably would have said you took too long to put it down.
yeah,
He's an advocate of, if the muse isn't singing, don't force anything and pay specific time to both, how did he put it? Relaxing and doing nothing. I think he categorized as two different things, or something to do with recreation and doing nothing as two separate things. So to specifically do nothing. And the
mm,
other thing then was almost like to tease the muse back up, enjoy yourself.
yes,
And
yeah,
then
that's
when she shows her face again, then go, right, play guitar or whatever it may be. And I thought, first of all, listen to someone who's a very successful artist on this point. And second of all, it sounds, sometimes you hear something that has truth and it both feels good in one way. If, how do I put this? It felt good to hear it, but not felt good that I was off the hook. It felt good that I was both off the hook from excessive diligence and there was a truth to it.
yeah, that's right. That's so good. You know, I used to go to this Thai restaurant near where I work. It's gone now, unfortunately. But when they had a little Buddha, and it was I think it was a Buddha, and but they had a little shrine built for it in the corner of the restaurant, and they would pour little drinks for it, like a little bit of Coca-Cola in a tiny cup, and a little bit of food in a tiny little bowl, and they would just leave it there because I guess it's an offering. And I was thinking about what sort of offering do you need to coax the muse back into your life? And Bradbury's advice is a pretty good one because what he's saying is by doing nothing, what you're really doing is you're pouring a little bit of boredom into a cup. And that little bit of boredom is the offering that coaxes the muse in, right? That instead of saying, here is boredom, muse, come and help me get out of here.
Mm.
Whereas if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you're feeling like there's a should looming over your shoulder, kind of scowling at you, that is the opposite of the muse. I don't even know if there's a word for it. I feel like there should be, but it's some kind of anti-muse. It's the thing. It's that very stern, deliberate, earnest, rule-following, demanding
Mm.
drill sergeant type that really doesn't have anything creative or fun-loving about it. There's no form of play in there at all. It's just you better get this done and you better do it right. And I want to see the work on my desk on Monday. Like
Yeah.
that's the end of your creative life, and that's probably the end of your spiritual life, and that's the end of your your relationship with your kids or your friends or everything else. All good things. It's the death of all good things.
Yeah, and that drill sergeant that shows up over the shoulder, that's the same drill sergeant that shows up to the shoulds of exercise too, where people have resistance to taking care of their body. And I don't think it's for the lack of wanting um, a higher quality of life or a sense of ease in the body.
No,
I
it's like you
think,
want it too much, right? You want it so much it's ballooned to the point where you just can't deal with it at all.
but I think actually it's the drill sergeant is what the difficulty is with dealing with. It's like I'd almost take the not changing myself so as not to have to deal with that drill sergeant that hangs over my shoulder in a constant state of critique over every move I do for the next hour and a half, whether it be running and lifting weights or whatever the thing may be. But it's just this constant berating from the inner drill sergeant that makes people squeamish. Like, I've experienced with this in regards to coaching when I find out I ask my clients how they criticize themselves or how they give themselves critique. And it's often abusive
Mm-hmm.
until the person themselves is actually trained to identify, first of all, the presence of the critic, this drill sergeant, and that he's scolding them. And in fact, that critic, that drill sergeant, is potentially them who wants better for themselves. And what they could use is this inner scolding as a marker, like a blinky light on the dash to say something to be corrected. And not just to move on, but to stay with it and ask themselves, what is it in the task at hand that I am cueing myself to modify? And to stay with it until they get to the bottom of the critique. And then they actually get savvier at their inner critique because they arrive at something practical. And then the drill sergeant, over time, becomes a companion. And then in getting involved in the act of, let's call it, well, I don't really want to call it exercise. Lately, I've been referring to it as feeling, healing, and stealing. Just time to feel the body, heal the body, and make yourself steal the body, getting stronger. I think it's an easier sell than the concept of exercise because that term has been so bastardized and there's so many tag-alongs like this drill sergeant that have kind of ruined it. But I think with time, you can get familiar with the drill sergeant, turn him into your companion, and together, as one, your act of taking care of yourself actually becomes this collaboration. And I think what's necessary for it is a journal so that your thoughts can go on paper in real time next to the practice so you can see them back.
Good. It sounds like you're describing saddling a dragon.
It sounds way cooler the way you put
No,
it.
it is really it is cool because what you're describing is taking like a wrathful deity or something like that in Buddhism and realizing that it's trying to help you, but the way it's going about it is it's taking the wrong angle. So you're training yourself to train it to serve you better.
And I think the only reason it needs taming is because its articulative capacity is poor
Yeah.
from previous exposure to mentors and leaders and teachers who also were articulatively poor and also inconsiderate in how they were offering their critique.
Yeah, I think that's why when you initially kind of described the Rescape project to me, and our entry point was this concept of play. I think the reason why we picked play out of all the possible realms was play is always kind of consensual. You kind of have to want to play. You can't be forced or browbeaten into really truly playing. I mean, obviously, someone can force you to play a game, but you're not really playing it if you're doing it against your will. So there was a consensual element to it. There was a fairly relaxed element to it, which is not to say that you can't take games very seriously, but you remember that they're games, so you remain kind of loose and limber, and you're at least ostensibly enjoying the process. But what I've found now that we have this podcast YouTube channel thing is it's amazing how almost anything can turn into a chore or a task without any warning, right? So uh, I can I can have this conversation with you and I can enjoy it to the nth degree. And then we can stop recording. And then it turns into this object, a recording, that I have some responsibility towards to put on to put out into the world and then hope that it does well. And I also have like resistance to that too, this idea of like we're meant to be doing it. It feels like we have a social responsibility to make this succeed. But I don't know what succeed means, and I don't know what we. I guess what I'm trying to say, God, I'm so tangled up, is that there's a paradox here. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but it's something like, how do you spread the good news about relaxing into having the life you want to have without turning into this stressed out, success obsessed, agenda obsessed weirdo who just like exemplifies the complete opposite of what you're trying to share with other people.
Yeah.
And I
So
err on the side of like, I'd rather do nothing. Like, I'd rather like do nothing to promote this podcast than try and promote this podcast and become something I don't want to be.
that's my take on it. I think just like I'm enjoying the act of creating with you, and that
Yeah.
stops there for me in regards to promotion or anything like that. I'm not even getting involved. I'm just gonna put it out there and get on to the next one with you. And if somebody stumbles across it and has a good time, fist bump. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I get the impression that the muse grows up out of the ground. I don't think it comes down from like that. It's not a top-down agenda driven entity. It rises up out of the body as a need, like an emotional need. And so the better we get at listening to that, rising up from some secret core, the better will exemplify that. And I think that then this thing, maybe nothing will come of it, but if anything comes of it, the only thing that will come of it will be good things and it won't inadvertently be this source of like misinformation or bad but well-intentioned advice. You know, the kind of grind culture. Man, you just need to discipline yourself, hammer yourself into like,
Oh hell no. Absolutely not.
not on my watch.
No, hell no. There's enough of that going on out there.
Yeah. And straight, you know, God bless them. Like they maybe
Hmm.
some are in need, they're too slack and they need some more yang and tighten up that string and make it play. And that's just what they need. But that is not what I need.
For sure. I don't need any of that too. I like to swing both ways, so to speak.
Do you like to
Bit
be
of
able to
yin, bit
pivot
of
back
yang.
and forth between the yin and the yang?
Absolutely. Anything else might be too unbalanced. Yeah, I like to fight fellas on a routine basis just as much as I like to stand still.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. We started our conversation in around discussing Buddhist monks having some level of resistance to sit down and meditate, but they do it
They do it.
anyway. But they do it anyway, and I'm under the impression that they do it out of pure discipline. So, as much as we're talking about flirting with the muse, there is some merit in practicing self-discipline. Not to the
Yeah.
extent that you're talking about, like to stay hard, lift on a mountain for the sake of it, which I also appreciate the value in that. But there certainly is something to be said for um, the practice of discipline, if only for increasing the finite willpower a person has, because
Yeah.
that's what's being created, right?
Yeah. What they were saying was they know from experience that no matter how strong their resistance to sitting down on the mat, once they're in the process of meditating, they love it. So they know that all they have to do is get past this threshold. It's like
Mm-hmm.
surface tension. And then once they've got through that, it's kind of easy sailing. The image that comes to my mind is like you have a sailboat with an outboard motor. You can't, there's only so much fuel in the outboard motor. You can't use it to get everywhere you're going in the sailboat. You just use it to get out of the harbor. And then you turn off the engine, the willpower, and you put up the sail. And then the wind takes you the rest of the way. Like you don't really you don't use effort past that point. The wind is
Mm-hmm.
going to push you the rest of the way. But you do need an outboard motor sometimes to just get out of the damn harbor. And sometimes it's that part. It's just that sticking part, that little
Mhm.
initial thing that get me out of the harbor, to get me out into where the wind is, where I can catch it in the sail. That's the bit that I'm reluctant. I just feel like there's not enough fuel in the outboard motor for me to do it today. And as a result, I don't go sailing. And that just seems like a shame.
Yeah, I get that. The image I have is of penetrating a membrane. That you
Mm.
just kind of have to wiggle, 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 and past that until you're, let's say, at the egg or whatever. But it's always that membrane idea, and I've thought about this quite a bit. That a practice also need to include the sharpening of the head and the strengthening of the tail to get through the membrane. And I've given some thought to this, by the way. And basically lubricating the entry point into the practice. Now, in the context I'm discussing, it is a physical practice because this is my
Yeah.
line of profession. But with clients, I'm often discussing how it is we could sharpen the head and strengthen the tail to pass that. How to make it as inviting as possible. Now, not that there's no one size fits all in that, but like making the thing you want to do as luring as you can is a really good idea. Like, for example, you want to sit down to write a book, have that cup of tea, whatever it is, that nice music on, the nice aromas, what makes it inviting?
Yeah.
I think these things are
That's it.
important.
You never, ever sit down to write a book. Always sit down to write a paragraph.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, I think so. Because you can, I think writing a sentence is too low a bar. It's not interesting or exciting enough of a challenge. But if you write a paragraph, you really are trying to assemble a collection of thoughts so that they start getting you somewhere interesting. And so a paragraph is doable, but it's still a challenge. But if you try to write a book, I think some people can. I mean, I have, but I always thought of it as one paragraph after another.
That's so brilliant because not only is it, I suppose, like sharpening the head to get beyond the membrane and get you to the task because it's not so overwhelming, it finishes on a high note because I want to get back to put the second paragraph in the next piece of the jigsaw.
Yeah.
It's called back, and in the movement practices I offer people creating a practice, I would be suggesting to always finish on a high note, not when you're tired.
Yeah, I like that. I really do. I really like that in my own practice too. And I feel like such a hypocrite right now, giving people advice about how to get past the threshold when I just spent the whole day telling myself, you're going to exercise now. And then I just, one opportunity after another, I went, nope, I'll do this other easier thing first. And then a later this evening, I'll do it. I am committing to doing it now at this stage, but I just, I just find it fascinating. Like the thing that I'm always endlessly curious about is how you can struggle to do a thing that definitely is good for you and that you like and that doesn't cost you any money. There's no, it's not, it isn't a problem, but you're treating it as if it was. That to me is, that's a mystery.
Why could we think of it like this way? Is it because it's a death of the way you are now, and you're going to change states and be another way?
I think it is. It's the same way as like you were reluctant to get in the water, right? Because it was cold.
Exactly,
Yeah.
precisely, because I know that who and how I am now will come to a sudden halt. And I
There'll be a
also,
crisis. There'll be a crisis, right? When you hit the water, there'll be the crisis of the cold water, and you'll have to deal with it. Like, and I even just sitting down to write is a kind of a crisis, right? As
Mhm.
soon as you sit down and you open your computer, it might sound ridiculous. There'll be people listening to this maybe that go, "What are you talking about? Like, sitting down to write isn't a crisis," but it is if you really care about writing, or it can be.
The one personality trait that is flexible is openness. It seems
Mhm.
that the rest are pretty much written in, and you can train your openness. And the development of openness, or being fortunate enough to already be high in openness, has is generally meaning that the person is flexible of mind, open to ideas. And that flexibility, I think a person with low flexibility would, just as a speculative, would have more resistance to change and getting through the resistance than a person who is less open of mind. I'd imagine they have more resistance to get through. So one benefit, one parallel practice would be that of generating a more open mind, generating neuroplasticity, becoming more open. So as you become more skilled and suffer less in penetrating the membrane of resistance.
Yeah, it's funny because we were talking a little bit about West Point. I took my brother to West Point recently, and that place is like a shrine to pure discipline. Those guys don't give a rat's ass about how open you are, so much as you know what you need to do, and then you do it, and there are no excuses. So I reckon if you want to move forward in life, you either become, you know, really, really quite rigid and unflinching, or you become the monk that is going to sit because it's time to sit. You become a guy with a literal, maybe even literal drill sergeant screaming at you to do the push-ups, or you go the other extreme and become way more sensitive and open to your internal processes and why you want what you want, and you become way better at negotiating with yourself what you actually need in that moment. Because I live in a world where I can do that kind of inner negotiation work, like I have the liberty to do it. No one's breathing down my neck in any real sense to do anything. Then I tend to go that open route.
Mm.
But I sometimes envy the people who are just super, super closed. They're not open at all, but they just have this kind of, because they have decided they're going to do it now, they can actually make themselves do it because they're not even open to the prospect of questioning doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get it done.
Yeah, I think again with the yin and yang swing, I think I would sway to the open and the diligent. I can't put myself into any one particular boat.
Yeah. Well, you kind of have to, right? I mean, if you're open, you're open. It's not much point in pretending. There's not much point in pretending you're a monk or a soldier when you're not, right? I mean, if you're an artist, and you have to be an artist, right? You just you have to find the artist's way forward.
Yes, are you saying that the artist is most likely going to be the open type?
Yeah, right. They're going to have to find a new way. Maybe for some, they can have that like military discipline about sitting down. I know a lot of professional writers often say the muse tends to strike when you sit at your desk and do the damn work, right? So they usually put your ass in the seat and do it, and then let the muse come, as opposed to wait for the like try and seduce or come, because that probably would work. But some days, you just there's a reason why you don't want to sit down, and I think it's interesting to try and investigate that rather than browbeat yourself or feel guilty about not doing it.
There's a distinction here between an artist and something else, this soldier. But this also seems something that you would have brought to my attention before, the distinction between the professional and the amateur. I don't think they're both very clear, but I think you can approach, let's say, your recreational life in that of like, I recreationally take care of my body and I recreationally play guitar and I recreationally do all these things that give me joy, but I feel my obligations as a professional in the real world. Like most people, most 9 to 5, love my family, and the things I do around that, I don't necessarily have to have a drill sergeant. My income isn't dependent on it. These could be probably considered the amateurs, the lovers of.
Yeah,
And then maybe the amateur is better off taking the artist openness route
yeah.
to have a life less frictionful.
I think that there's something about because the amateur. I touched on this in an essay I wrote before, but the word is derived from love, amor. So it means you do it just because you love it, primarily because you love it, not because anyone needs you to do it or because you're being paid to do it or anything else. And when you love something, that can lower the stakes or it can raise the stakes, right? In a way, the amateur can be someone who's uh, motivated to do it more than the professional is motivated to do it on a certain level. Um, and the question is, how hot do you want that fire to burn before you start to worry that maybe it'll burn you, right? And I think that a lot of artists have to ask this question because some people stop doing their art because they're afraid it'll destroy them in some way, right? Just suck them into it so deep that they'll really become kind of addicted. No, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have that kind of relationship with writing. But I could see how some people might just stop doing something altogether just because when they sit down to do it, they feel the fire burning. And it's just a level of intensity that they're not used to. And that's the reason they can't make themselves go forward. Because, like we've talked in previous conversations about making friends with intensity is basically one of the most important life skills you can have. And resistance might be, in part, a recurring reluctance to embrace intensity again today, you know?
And we're talking about an intense love, something passionate. And we know what you mean by the burning
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah, it's like turning away from love. Like you're afraid that you don't either deserve it or it's too much.
That's a good description of what the membrane of resistance could be.
It's funny you use sperm and egg imagery for
Mhm.
this in and to come to the context of love in the end. Um, I've enjoyed this conversation, Rob. I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, right on.